Wendy is a lifelong learner and is passionate about communication through various media. Creating aha moments both in and out of the classroom is one of her major motivations, as well as being a muso, a mama, and married to a high school sweetheart. Ladies and gentlemen, Wendy Joubert. To build or not to build?
The building is packed with people dressed in their Sunday best, standing and singing with one voice to the unmistakable sound of the organ. As my dad plays, the music transports me a little closer to the place of which we're singing. I close my eyes and lean back. The music stops. Suddenly, or as suddenly as an organ can. The congregation sputter on, trying to sing a cappella. I look at my dad, confused. The minister looks at my dad, confused. "Turn it back on," he whispers, and motions for me to flip the switch behind me. The organ experiences its own resurrection, and my dad continues to play the musical accompaniment. A little smile creeps across his face. It's only then that I realize what just happened. I stopped the music. I turned off the organ in the middle of the church service. In August 2018, the music stopped again, but this time it couldn't be remedied with the flick of a switch. My dad had passed away, and the silence that followed was deafening. Grief. It was as though an enormous gap had opened up between my life before and my life now without him. Would there ever be a way to span that gap again? As I reflected on his life, I began to think, beyond what can be willed to next of kin, what had he left me? What was his legacy? Many of my earliest memories revolve around music. My dad was a church organist, and many Saturdays and Sundays were spent sitting next to him on the organ bench, turning the pages of his music while he played. My memories of music are such happy ones, full of fun and laughter. Like the one time the bride was 45 minutes late for her own wedding, and my dad had grown tired of being the background music. "Watch this," he whispered, and started to play. Dum, dum, da, dum, 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 dum. To the untrained ear, it sounds exactly like, "Here comes the bride." And so the whole congregation rose to their feet, eagerly craning their necks to see that long-anticipated bride. But the music took a different turn, and one by one, they all sat down, quite sheepishly. Needless to say, they hadn't learned their lesson, because a few minutes later, when that refrain repeated, they were all up on their feet again, looking for that non-existent bride. My dad and I could barely contain our giggles as we sat next to each other on the organ bench. And when the bride finally did arrive, she was halfway down the aisle before anybody dared stand to their feet. Music brought out the fun in my dad. It created moments of laughter for us, whether it was round the piano, at home, or anywhere the music took us. My dad's legacy to me of laughter was written between the pages of his music book. Gary Chapman wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages, but I think my dad would have added a 6th, food. If he invited you to a meal, he was saying, "I like you. I think I'd like to get to know you better." But if he cooked for you, he was saying, "I love you." Many times when we'd arrive impromptu for a Sunday afternoon visit, my dad would spring up out of his armchair lethargy and declare, "What's to eat?" And then he'd hustle off to the kitchen and whip up some of his famous drop scones, which usually included a few unique ingredients. It was his way of saying, "I'm so glad you came. You have to stay and spend time with us a little bit more." Fricadelles were his specialty and a staple part of our family diet. Daddy personally rolled about 250 of them for our wedding reception. I knew that if I wanted to have a heart-to-heart with him, it had to happen over a meal, or at least a chocolate. P.S. I love you. I learned how to speak his love language back to him too. My dad's legacy of love was cooked up in the kitchen and often served with gravy or custard. Daddy didn't fit into the usual male stereotype. He could perm hair, tint eyelashes, hem curtains, and shop me until I dropped. He could also dance really well. When I was a little girl, he taught me by letting me stand on his feet. And from the waltz to the cha-cha, he would move me around our lounge floor. And that was how I learned the patterns and the rhythms for each dance. If you'd asked me as a child what it looked like to be in love, I would have described my parents dancing together. Daddy dressed like Prince Charming, and my mom wearing her black and gold, high-heeled, patent leather shoes, twirling and floating across the dance floor. Magic. When I was 12 years old, I got my own pair of black high-heeled dancing shoes. By now, I had learned a lot more, and I felt so much more confident and so proud when Daddy led me onto the dance floor with him. Somehow, though, once I got there, I could do things that I never dreamed while I was safe and secure in his arms. It was only later that I realized that when Daddy taught me how to dance, he also taught me about leadership. A leader sees potential. They patiently train, and they're able to guide those in their charge to do more than they themselves expect, sometimes at the risk of having their feet trodden on. My dad's legacy of leadership to me was the rhythm of a dance and was counted in, and 1, 2, 3. Earlier this year, I stood in a beautiful cathedral in Cambridge and listened to the organ play. My sister and I cried together. Grieving is a process. It's learning to live your life without that person in it anymore. I have discovered, though, that there are bridges, legacy bridges, that help to span that gap of grief, while at the same time creating new points of connection with those we love who are still with us. A legacy is built through laughter, through love, and through leadership. Daddy built those bridges for me using music, food, and dancing. How are you building your legacy bridges?